thank you for joining us with Life is Art. I am sitting here with a good friend of mine, Narciso Arguelles. He is a known educator, activist, an incredible artist, and one of the most opinionated and brave people that I know. And he has graced me with his presence here at the studio, and I'm happy to have you here with me, man.
Thank you for the invitation. It's always been an honor when people ask me to do things like this. I'm always willing and free to impart some sort of knowledge. So I thank you again for the invitation.
Well, you've always been a wealth of knowledge and conversation. And my apologies, I thought that 1515 Cafe was going to be open today, but it's the holidays, and I failed to look at the schedule that was written plainly on the door.
No worries.
So,
no worries.
I apologize for that, but I'm looking forward to having a pretty in-depth conversation about a lot of things. I have no idea where the talk is going to go, but I'm glad to have you aboard.
Thank you so much.
Narciso and I were sitting here talking about some of our experiences as artists and in the realm of academia. I'm not an academic per se, but I have been involved in symposiums and all that stuff. But Narciso is the real deal. And one of the other things that I love about Narciso is he's brave to the 10th power. This guy he will speak his mind. And Narciso, when he speaks his mind, it's well thought. He speaks with logic and he speaks with reason, but he's always had passion about what he believes in. And now that things have, come full circle, we worked in an organization that was devoted to diversity in our arts community. That organization is still around, but the idea of diversity is changing. The idea of a lot of things in our social environment is changing. And one of those things is, the growth of cancel culture, the growth of different ideas about identity. And as an academic, Narciso has had to navigate that, and I think it's fascinating to get his perspective of what it's been like to do that. So Narciso, let everybody know, what are you involved in right now? You're still in academia.
That's correct. I teach high school during the day, and I teach at the college level at night, and I've been doing that for years now. It's got to be over 10, 15 years I've been doing this. When I first moved to Oklahoma, I was just a college professor, right? Adjunct at several colleges and universities, the adjunct art life. And prior to that, when I was living in California, I did the same thing. I was a adjunct professor at several community colleges and private universities, teaching anything from drawing, painting, or art history. I've been doing it for over 20 years.
And you've also been an exhibiting artist in the past. I remember your work. Very, very politically driven, very socially driven, and very informed. I think that's one thing that I've always loved about your work is if I asked a question or I pushed, you had to respond that wasn't just a middle finger. And you have a desire to, explain, okay, well, I might not be able to convince you, but let me tell you my story.
Right.
And I think that maybe this change in culture, I don't know if you agree with me, has changed because our ability to communicate has changed. And I don't know if we're seeing a regression in that because, from what I see, there's times that I've gotten into arguments where, words were blurted out. And I wasn't able to make a point because of the anger associated with the position of the other person.
Right. You bring me back, man. When I was in a student, I went to school did my undergrad work at University of California, San Diego. A lot of people have heard of UCLA
Yep.
or Cal Berkeley. The UC system has several campuses, and I went to the San Diego one for my undergrad, and I went to UC Irvine for my graduate work, my MFA work. And back then, I'm not shy to say we had political talks. People disagreed, and academia was in such a way where nobody got, I mean, at least I don't think so, nobody got hurt feelings. We were able to still be friends, still act professionally, and we were under this umbrella of education where it was okay to disagree, and you just brought your ideas. And part of the college experience was to get other points of view. And
That's what I assumed academia was. I always assumed that it was the last bastion of reason.
Mm-hmm. And it was like that when I went to school. I graduated in 1998. Seems like forever ago with my MFA. And yes, it was open discussion. I don't remember ever feeling like, oh, I better not say this or I have to be careful. And it could be discussion of religion. It could be any kind of political view, ideas of gender, all those things. Everything that we hear today, like in mainstream media, was addressed back then. And it seems, it seems odd to me. I mean, those kind of ideas and that terminology eventually made its way to pop culture and the media. It took years, but I remember like, wow, they're talking about identity politics, and that's something, I first got introduced back, in the late 80s when I went to college for the first time. And it was curious to me that how many people started using those terms, and perhaps not maybe in a constructive way, or maybe not. It lacked what I see now, that those kind of talking points sometimes lacks context or the work that it took to get to that point, that idea. No longer do you have to go through several classes on French and Spanish philosophers about postmodernism or structuralism. Now you can watch a 5-minute YouTube video, and now you're an expert in identity politics.
You bring up a very important point. Communication. You mentioned that there were different opinions about a topic, and you were able to express those opinions. Well, back in the days, we were able to convey not only complete sentences, but also complete paragraphs and complete ideas. And nowadays, we live in a time where you have anywhere from 30 seconds, i.e. TikTok, to maybe, I don't know what the max is for Instagram Reels or whatever, maybe a minute and some change, short form content. I think it's starting to make for short form thought process. And I think that's where, in off audio, we were talking about how people now blurt out segments of ideas.
Right.
So when you do that, you're right, there's no context as to what that means. When you say patriarchy, what is that? What do you mean by that?
Right.
When you say misogyny, what do you mean by that? When you say racism, and you're talking to another black guy, calling another black guy
right.
A white supremacist,
right?
What exactly? And again, I don't want to dismiss anything that's said, but I do want the opportunity to examine all of those things that are said, and it takes longer than 20 seconds.
Right. And the hope is that both parties come away with more information to make their own decisions.
Yeah.
That is the hope of any lifelong as an educator, you say this phrase, lifelong learner.
Yeah.
And that's what my hope is. It's like, hey, let's not censor that guy's thought. I want to hear what he has to say, because maybe I need to hear that, or maybe I can instruct them like, hey, there's another point of view. This is what I've heard, and this is what I've experienced. And the hope is through that kind of discussion, we both come away with something. Either it could be as simple as, like you said, how to structure a sentence.
A complete thought.
Yeah, that even if that's all you get out of this interaction with somebody, it's still worthwhile.
Well, and I think we spend a lot of time trying to cure one another. It's if I don't agree with something, then somehow it's an affliction. Right. It's, oh my gosh, you've been infected with, and I'm like, I've been infected with an opinion.
Yeah.
But for people that subscribe to the echo chamber, it kind of scares me. And it scares me because if we all have the same answer to something, whether it's racial or whatever, if it's the same answer yielding the same results, but we're too afraid to have a broader conversation that would yield a different result, my fear is that we never get off of page one of any discussion that we're having.
Yep.
And that kind of scares me to a certain extent. Being a Black American, I remember this a long time ago. I went to this symposium, and it was something about erase the hate, and they took some of the art had taken pages from, I think, Nazi manifestos, and they had put it in a context where it was anti-racist. They had taken the stuff and they had repurposed it for something positive. Well, when we started talking about race and racism, what happened was there was 3 girls. I think they were either 2 white and 1 black, or she could have been possibly Latina. She was fair-skinned, but I couldn't tell. There was something, she could have gone either way. Well, these kids get up and they say, well, we were interested in seeing this discussion because we wanted to know how we could stop or help as far as being a champion of anti-racism. She said, because in our groups, it doesn't exist. We don't have these problems, but we recognize that there is that problem elsewhere. Well, this guy on the panel said, well, you haven't really lived. You don't really know anything. You really don't get that the world is much broader, and kind of smashed on these kids.
So too bad.
So my response was, he gets his hand claps and all that. My stomach is grumbling. I thought that cafe was going to be open, but my response was, okay, well, let's say that this is this little microcosm of no racism exists. Why are we not examining why it doesn't exist there, and how can we apply it to a broader group of people? And when I said that, it was like people were, I never thought of that. But it seems to be the most logical. So I don't know if we've become so interested in the conversation that we're terrified by the solution because it'll end the talk. And I think that's on a lot of fronts. I don't think, just the racial thing. I think with other groups, I think a lot of times those points end up being things that are utilized as tools by people that really don't care about remedying the problem.
Yeah. You got me thinking about a lot of different things, man. One of the things that I try to focus on when I speak to people is I try to put myself in their shoes.
Yeah.
And that has helped the process of this exchange of ideas. And oftentimes when I speak to them, I bring it up.
Yeah.
I would say something like, hey, you probably are focused on this part. And I want to reassure you, and then I tell them what I think. That I realize that, and I understand it, and I may even agree with you, your perspective,
Mm-hmm.
and so it puts them at ease and say, oh, okay, this guy is not talking down to me, he's not belittling me, but he really kind of understands. And I find that if I start with that, it kind of makes them more receptive.
And it's without the threat of changing somebody. It's, when a person feels like, here we go, he's going to change me. They're out to flip my point of view. If you take that away, you're right. It really does open the door for communication. I've had conversations with people that when taking that approach, it goes past 30 seconds of anger. Mm-hmm. And it goes into 30 minutes of understanding.
Yeah. The other thing I was thinking about as you were talking was this idea of what does inclusion really mean? Is it getting a different perspective? Is it perhaps it's something really simple? It's maybe changing your lens. Like, okay, this may not affect my life. I'm going back to that symposium that you went to. This may not affect my life or where I am in this community in any way. It might not even exist. But how can we address that in a viewpoint from somebody else? For example, hey, there's no, I had this discussion. I'm kind of ashamed to say it. It was online maybe 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And I still remember it because I was on my way. I was traveling from Oklahoma to California, and on a rest stop somewhere, and I'm checking my messages, and I get on social media, and I see this discussion at a teacher board about doing Day of the Dead Catrinas or Sugar Skull worksheets, or how, the teacher had a very honest question: how do I approach this with my students? How do you guys recommend I approach this? And it was very obvious that she was not part of that culture. I didn't know if her students were or not. So I mentioned, she was asking for advice. So I mentioned, maybe I wasn't as thought out because I was, at this rest area on my way to California. I was really had my mind on a lot of different things, but I wanted to address this because I see a lot of, for some reason, there was a rash of these projects that were happening around the same time. And I didn't want to let it go. Hey, here I am. I'm part of that culture. I grew up in Mexico. Some of my family members celebrate Day of the Dead. I grew up Roman Catholic, all these things. I go, okay, here I am from that culture, and I can give some information.
Yeah.
So my suggestion was, hey, whatever you do, please don't do it on the surface. Like it's decoration. Try to involve the community somehow. That you're addressing in this. Like, you have to ask a lot of questions. Like, why am I doing this? Is it to address a need? Maybe your students are from Mexico, Latino, whatever. So I'm, just giving her friendly advice, and people went after me. One of the things somebody said was, "So I teach art history and I talk about hieroglyphs. So you're telling me I can't talk about hieroglyphs because it's North African?"
Wow.
No, I don't know how he got this. And I said, "No, sir, I'm not talking about art history. I'm talking about art making." And the example I gave is okay. Let's change the culture. Would you do art project, art worksheet, or whatever it is, could be elementary school, whatever, where you decorate Star of David's, or this change let's change culture. Let's say you're drawing a war bonnet, during Indigenous Peoples Day or something. Would you do that? And they said that very few people actually understood where I was coming from. It was just I was just trying to get people to ask questions.
Yeah.
And some of them accused me, this guy's not even a teacher. And I said, I've taught high school for a long time. I'm an AP art teacher.
Were they just interested in going off the rails? There are some people that are interested in just going off the rails.
I think they genuinely, I don't know I think they had a label for me as woke, or they felt personally attacked. And this is what people do when you start introducing different ideas. One reaction is that it's a personal attack. Like, oh, I must be racist. He's calling me racist because I don't know, I'm not part of that culture. And so they get very defensive. And if I would have had more time, I would have been I would have taken more of my time. It's difficult to do on social media. And I thought,
yeah, because it's rapid fire.
Yeah. And I thought because we were all teachers, they knew where I was coming from, but they don't have the same kind of response. One teacher did say, hey, I'm not Latino, but all my students are. How would you suggest I go about doing this without being, without culture appropriating this, cultural appropriation is the term that they were using. And I said, well, the way I would do it is these kids must have parents.
Yeah.
Why not invite the parents and then they run the workshop and you're there supervising, talking about art elements and design principles, doing the art making part of it, how to handle the paint. I then have them talk about the history and the meaning behind it. And I go, if they're not available during the day, maybe they have a job. There's this thing that's called a cell phone. They can videotape themselves, do a little YouTube upload. There's so many solutions, because teachers are problem solvers at the core. They're problem solvers. So I was having a hard time understanding why they weren't making that
connection.
Yeah, that connection, or that kind of logical leap. Oh, wait a minute! I actually could do this.
You were talking about inclusion. You talked about how a talk goes off the rails, and this may be controversial for some people. I don't look at diversity as a positive thing in conversations. And I'll explain before some listeners get mad at me. I believe in diversity, but I believe diversity is very nuanced. I think it's more important for there to be an understanding of how 2 or 3 people argue amongst each other. I don't think there can be very much diversity in that in order to have a successful conversation. I think you actually have to communicate in the same way to be able to hear different thoughts. And a good example of that is if you come from an environment where people are aggressive, and the way that they communicate is if they don't agree with you, they punch you in the face. And I come and I say, well, hey, I don't agree with you, and I'm immediately hit in the face. The only way that I could convey my point is to overpower that person and then make my point. There's no way we can be on the same page as far as communication. And I think we apply the word diversity, and I look at your conversation that you had that was completely misunderstood.
Yeah.
It never would have been misunderstood if both people had the same capacity to communicate. I think communication's more important than like symbolism as far as diversity. I even question of how diverse of a community we are. When we're all on the same page as far as communication, we have very incredible conversations. You know, I might not agree with you, you might not agree with me, but we all leave the table as friends, not as attackers, not as victims, not as, assailant and the assailed. So have any of your ideas as far as diversity, because that's how we bonded, that's how we met over conversations of diversity, as far as communication, not racial diversity. I don't even want to look at racial diversity right now, but just the vehicle of communication. Do you think that there's some merit to being more homogenous in how we communicate? Is there, because if we don't communicate the same, somebody's always having to cross the aisles. And we're small people, I think, sometimes, and nobody wants to cross the aisle to reach over for that communication. So,
and going back to that example I gave, there were people that came to me and defended me.
Yeah.
And there were people that privately messaged me and said, I know exactly what you're talking about. Thank you for speaking up. And even some people said, hey, be careful. Even though this was a closed group, there's teachers from all over the country on this group.
Did any of them defend you publicly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So when one of them attacked my my credentials, like, why is this guy here? Somebody even said, I don't think he's a teacher.
Without giving you the chance to.
Right.
You can pull a resume. What's your email? Let me email you my resume.
And as soon as I said, hey, these are my credentials, then I was allowed to talk.
Yeah.
So it's curious. I hate buzzwords. Sometimes I use them when I joke around as to be sarcastic or to be just to be satirical. But the buzzword for me, in that case,
you have to be careful of that because some people don't understand sarcasm.
Right? No, correct. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And this goes back to education.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to say that just because you didn't take this class or that class, you don't have a seat at the table, but you do have to have some sort of knowledge with just basic English and how to communicate. And that can be tough, and sarcasm does exist in Spanish, so this stuff does communicate culturally if it's different countries. But you do have to have that kind of, you don't want to dumb it down when you're speaking to someone. And, I have that experience of when I grew up in Mexico and I moved to the U.S. when I was 9 years old. And I moved into a neighborhood and a community that was probably 95% Latino.
Yeah.
Just across the border from Tijuana to San Diego. I could walk to the physical border from my house. That's how close I was to the border. And so everybody was Mexican. But I still got the bullying as far as I didn't understand English. I didn't understand certain cultural cues.
Yeah.
So I understand from how it is to be an outsider and perceived as uneducated. So I hope I'm not coming off as elitist. But there is that idea of language. Does language matter? That this, and I have this discussion with other educators, and trying to get them to see, hey, what I said was, I used the word like. This is a simile I'm using. I'm not saying this is identical, and I don't feel like I have to explain like basic language here. But people are so quick to misunderstand you. I'm not sure where that comes from, maybe, like you were saying, maybe it's like, hey, I am this type of person, so you're looking for the racism, or you're looking for...
I think there's just been a cultural shift as far as, I think we're in a Cliff Note generation. And with Cliff Notes, you read enough to get by.
Yeah.
But then you miss the richness of the conversation. But you get your A. You know, the main idea of the story is this: I don't agree with you about this, or I'm questioning this, and that's it. We never get down to the why. We never get down to the similarities of the arguments that we might have. We never figure out that we may be taking the scenic route to the same answer, because all we know is that we're different in how we answer. We're not even interested in how we arrive at whatever point we make. And I think that is very reflective. I don't know if it's reflective in art or not, and I wanted to know your take. I had spoken with a friend on a previous podcast, and to a certain degree, I kind of generalized. My thing is if you're going to make a statement, push it, push it, push it, push it. Your artistic communication, push it. If you're going to be a feminist, push it. And she immediately challenged me to, well, okay, well, if you think that we need to say something different, you know, if a feminist artist needs to say, well, what else different is there to say? Well, my whole thing was, well, if you're stepping into these roles that have been traditionally masculine, are you insecure about that? Is there some things that you could tell me about how you feel, rather than just, here's a painting of a woman's breasts, here's a woman with genitalia. What else can be said? What's the secondary conversation? And, you know, we both had a great time talking about that. We don't get into certain things because the cosmetics of conversations are now more important than the content of conversations. You know, if you look like a racist, you're a racist. If you sound like a racist, you're a racist, whether you said something racist or not. You're a misogynist if you say something in defense of an idea that is not necessarily inclusive of women. But that doesn't mean that you're, you know, talking bad about women. You may be talking about men's boxing. And it has nothing to do with women. It's men's boxing. That doesn't mean you don't think women can't box. It just means that this is a very site-specific conversation.
You know, I think of two things right away when you ask me those things. Yeah. One of them, and you know, as a as a teacher, I often use examples and you know, like, or anecdotes, like we did a little while ago. We talked about my online experience, but there's two things that I want to mention. One of them was I did this short film a few years ago through the help of a grant through OVAC, Oklahoma Visual Arts Coalition. It was Art 365, and they funded art making activity for a calendar year. And I did a short film. And during the many sessions where I was making work, not all the work made it to the film, but it was always focused on that process.
Yeah,
you're either experimenting with something, or you're going through ideation. So, and during that course, one of the actors in this film was a dancer. I was friends with her mom. They're Native American. And so she comes out in the film for a short time, but I took some photos.
Yeah.
And it almost made like, I didn't really make a poster for this film, but the idea was, okay, I need some sort of image for this poster. But I recycled, and the image came on, they put it on the OVAC magazine and Art Focus. They always publish the process work before the exhibit. So that's one of the images I sent them. And later on, I recycled that image and I printed it on metal for OVAC's 12 by 12.
I remember when you were doing works on metal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I sold a piece, and So a friend of mine, I think she was getting her PhD at this point. Uh, very smart. And I respected her a lot. And she asked me some very pointed questions about that image.
Yeah.
It's a photograph of a Native American girl dressed in ballerina clothes, but also having some, she had like a fan made out of feathers.
Yeah.
This is all, so the idea, the film was about placement and location and what is Western and what is indigenous. So I was asking a lot of questions in the film. So that's why the marriage of those two kind of cultures in that image. But she was asking me questions about why this young girl. And I said, well, she's in the film.
Yeah, and a very practical reason.
Right. And one of the reasons why I wanted to include an indigenous perspective, number one, I am indigenous from Mexico. And I also wanted to, I live in Oklahoma now, and I wanted to make sure there was some Native American representation in my film. And why couldn't it have been a woman? Why can't it be a woman? But she was asking, and I came to find out, she was kind of accusatory about, this image of a young girl, and she was making like connections to like an artist like Degas, for instance.
Yeah.
And objectifying young girls. And I said, whoa, 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 whoa. I said,
she was giving you a narrative,
right,
that you never even thought about.
Right. And I saw her point, and I said, okay, I get where you're coming from, but do you see where I'm coming from?
I think that's the disconnect.
Yeah. And I said, where I was coming from was inclusion. That was the heart of it. And she wasn't exploited. I know her.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm still friends with her and her family. She's now a freshman at OU, a very accomplished person, and I hope to work with her again. These are for me, when I collaborate with somebody, it's not just what can I get from this person. It's more like a true collaboration, and hopefully the idea is we can be lifelong friends. And the other thing you were talking about was making work, political work, and catering. Correct me if I'm putting words in your mouth. That discussion about whether you want to cater to a certain narrative or to a certain place or be true to yourself. And I will tell you, I've been very blessed with organizations and people who have known me for years, and they approach me and they say, we want to specifically work with you because you have this point of view. And I have found the truer you are to yourself, those opportunities. You're making art. That is interesting to you. There's got to be other people that find that interesting as well. So instead of trying to guess, like, okay, this is the latest fad.
Oh yeah, predict the latest climate for the art,
right? Or as long as you're true to yourself, you find your niche, and people appreciate who you are. Like, hey, this guy, this person, has this point of view, and we know exactly where he's coming from. And I saw this video recently, and it put into it reaffirmed so many things for me.
Mm-hmm.
It was about this screenwriter, and he was working with a Scott, the director of Blade Runner, Ridley Scott.
Ridley Scott.
And Ridley Scott was working with him on this screenplay, and he asked the guy, "So what is this movie about?" And he proceeds to tell the narrative. He goes, "No. What is it about?" And it took him a while to understand that even the question. So Ridley Scott worked with this guy for days to try to get to what the movie was about. Once they figured that out, he said, "Okay, now you can write the script, because everything has to go back
to what it's about."
To what it's about. And
that's interesting.
Yeah, and I go, yes, exactly. So when I make art, it's people ask me what's the motivation or what's the goal, and I'm very straightforward with them. I am a Chicano artist. I make work that speaks to my community, and that could be a celebration of culture. It could be documenting a reality, or it could be making art for hope. Maybe something doesn't exist yet and you want to push those ideas, but it all comes back to who I am and my culture, Chicano. Chicano celebrates the indigenous side, but also the European side and the mixture, the new mixture. And that's a short definition of what a Chicano is. So that is who I am. And I make work about who I am, essentially, because I am part of that culture. So my work, I would say 90%, maybe closer to like 95, 97% goes back to that grand idea, or what the work is about is, but being Chicano.
And I love your uncompromising stance on that. You're not my native side only, because there's whether we want to admit it or not, there's a vilification of Eurocentric ideas right now, and nobody wants to say that.
Right.
There's a vilification, particularly of, I guess the target on the back right now is the middle-aged white guy.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, even some white people, try to distance themselves from their own whiteness. I've never seen more white people try to find ways to I don't know, to deprecate themselves.
Right.
And I don't understand that. My thing is, as Americans, we're kind of here. We're not going anywhere. And this is another controversial, I think, point. I don't know that our diverse differences will bring us together. I think diversity brings texture for us to enjoy certain aspects of one another. But I think those things that we can agree on that are human bring us together. And whether that's from a visual identification, or whether that's from a literary identification, or just communication. We talked about communication, and how sometimes we're so different in how we communicate that we can't come to a conclusion on something. I think there has to be a focus on that, and an embracing of it. If we, kind of continue to look for a bad guy, we'll find it. If we look for a villain, we'll find it. And sometimes, if we can't find the villain, we'll make a villain, or a villain didn't exist. I think that's the worst thing you can do, as far as whether you're a racist, or whether a person is a racist, or a misogynist, or whatever. I think it's far worse when you create one, when one didn't exist there.
Right. Yeah, I do want to mention two things.
Yeah.
When we talked about being true to yourself and making artwork that is, there's an umbrella there of of an idea that it all goes back to that kind of idea. I don't want to say that you can't make other type of art, because I certainly have made commercial work, for instance, that doesn't have any kind of cultural association, because I'm just hired to do.
It's just work.
Yeah, it's just work. I'm hired to. A lot of my media is mostly photography, and I paint also. I do installation work. A lot of galleries want me to do installation work, probably because there's not a whole lot of installation artists in Oklahoma. So I don't want to say that all my work is based on this. And
but you have a strong identity that you're proud of, and, and it's the the native side and the European side. You're proud of both equally.
Exactly. And one person, in talking about people that are not villains, and I believe in how can I say this without sounding I don't want to fit through a stereotype, and I don't want people to misunderstand what I'm trying to say.
Rest assured, somebody will misunderstand what you're going to say, no matter how you frame it. They're looking to misunderstand what you're saying.
But I really believe there is a spiritual aspect to life, that we live in a physical world, but some things are beyond our understanding. And I'll give you an example. This short film that I referenced earlier, the name of the film is called Imaginary Spaces, by the way. It's about 7-8 minutes long, and it has people like J.B. Williams in it, Wamley Tall Chief, who's related to the Tall Chiefs, the historic native indigenous ballerinas that are from Oklahoma. And it was very important for me to have her in the film. I believe she was 18 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, our first day of filming, we filmed at what is known now today as the First Americans Museum, FAM. At that time, just to show you how long ago this was, it was still an empty shell. There was an outward building, and inside was unfinished. And it was important for me to film there because it was exactly what I was talking about. Like, we have a space, but do we really have a space?
I get you.
Right? So we have this kind of nod to indigenous cultures, but it was an empty shell at the time. So we filmed. It was premiered in the Main Site Art Center in Norman, Oklahoma. And then I went on doing more work, and I moved to Istanbul, Turkey to teach. I was gone for about 3 years. This is during the pandemic mostly. And I've been back for about 1.5 years. But within those 3 years while I was gone, I would still return to Oklahoma the summertime. And I got contacted by FAM, who was actually now finishing the building that was renamed, and they wanted my film to be part of the opening festivities, which I thought was a huge.
That's an honor.
That's a great honor.
Yeah.
And so I said, hey, what if we? This is what I pitched them. I said, yeah, I can shoot. You certainly have the film. It's not, thank you for including me. But if you want, we can refilm it, refilm parts of it with additional footage to give the history. Because the film right now, the way it is, it's very abstract.
Yeah.
There's no dialogue, for instance. Oh, there is dialogue. JB does this kind of spoken word, which is just one of his rap songs without music.
Yeah.
And so there is words, but it's very abstract. And you want to make it more like a documentary about the making of that film? And they agreed. So I said, I'm going to be back in Oklahoma during the summertime. We can film those things. We can edit it, and you have it by, I think they opened in September of that year. And so I go, I come, and we only had a short window because I was only here for the summertime. So we're getting getting the interviews done. And then we say, hey, well, let's get Wombly back, and Brianna Howard, which is that young Native American girl, back. And let's film them do some additional work now inside this beautiful completed space. And so we get there, have my crew, and we all get these alerts that morning. You know how social media sometimes gives you like, oh, this happened 2 years ago or 5 years ago. Well, we all got the same alert, the exact same date.
Wow.
As the original day of filming Inside Fam. Now we were there on the exact same day, years later, to film an update.
Wow.
And what we all realized when we got there is, hey, did you guys get that alert?
All at the same time?
And it was like, yes, it was like, this is, you cannot, as much as none of us were thinking about this and try to coincide anything, it was, it was just us working, and just the spiritually it just came together. It was so beautiful. And the whole experience filming that film and aspects of it, it could fill a book on how things fell into place, and how we got this location, how we got this person involved, and the premiere at Norman, because we had JB playing live with Wombly dancing. It was a magical night. It was so many things like that. It was, and you couldn't deny it.
And you all felt that.
Yeah.
That's that word, as far as the same.
Mm-hmm.
When you feel things human, from a human perspective that are the same, that's when we come together.
Yeah. It was so undeniable, and it brought me to tears. I mean, I'm getting choked up right now talking about it, and you can't explain it. You can't. You try to wrap your mind around it, and so lately, in the last few years, I am starting to see, and I heard, I believe it was Lauryn Hill talking about.
I used to have a major crush on her.
Is she gorgeous?
I used to love her.
Oh yeah, she's fantastic. And I heard her, like, again, in these videos. You know how we are. You watch these videos. You're probably like me. During downtime, you want to enrich yourself either with some music or some sort of documentary. Yep. And the artists are like this. They just keep feeding, getting information.
Yeah.
And one of the things that she was talking about was, and I'm so glad she worded it this way. She says, I want to be able to see God's hand. Like, if I look in that direction, I want to be able to see God at work.
Yeah.
And whatever you want to describe what she meant, or that idea of God, that's a different kind of talk that's too large for this kind of forum. But I knew exactly what she was talking about. And lately I've been seeing more and more these kind of connections. And I don't want to leave here without mentioning one of these heroes. The people use this term now, allies.
Yeah.
And they use it as buzzword. And we talked about this earlier. I'm not really into these buzzwords.
I hate buzzwords.
Right?
When it becomes a buzzword, I think it's been there too long.
Yeah. It becomes what we used to call an empty signifier.
Yeah.
It loses any kind of meaning. But I don't want to leave here without mentioning Jeremiah Davis, who was the director of Oklahoma Contemporary Arts Center for many years. And I consider this man a brother. And I don't use that term lightly. You know how some people say, hey, bro, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about using the word, hey, brother. And that is a spiritual term. We're not linked DNA. We're not blood brothers. This goes beyond the physical. It's more important than blood brothers, I believe. And this is one of those people that, like we talked about earlier, hey, we all, we had a meeting, this event is coming up, and we all agreed we want you part of it. And he has that mindset. And you can't teach somebody that.
You
You
were
haven't.
able to communicate the creative vision, and he understood
Yeah.
what you were talking about.
Yeah.
And that's that connective thing again, where you can't. That wouldn't have happened if he didn't hear and feel what you were saying.
Right.
You know.
And he invited me to do this piece. Just picked up the piece a few weeks ago. He invited me to work on ofrenda, or an altar piece for Day of the Dead at Oklahoma Contemporary, in conjunction with the Mexican consulate. So I thought, man, this is. I said, thank you again for this honor, and again, that would have happened if, I've never, we just became friends and we collaborated on things together. I've never asked him for I do ask him for favors every now and then, but it's not like, hey man, hook me up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I feel that then we wouldn't be friends.
Yeah.
If you're constantly looking for the angle. But we were just friends. We've shared drinks, we've shared cigars. And to me, these are rituals. I don't know how else to describe it. You wouldn't break bread with somebody who...
There's always rituals between friends.
Yeah. And throughout my time, I've had people that, I don't know what other word to use, but, so people can understand, ally, and people that understood that you're not checking off a box. Yes, I'm Latino, and yes, it would be good to have a Latino do this altar.
Yeah, it's not, all right, you'll do. It's not one of those situations.
Right. It was like, okay, who do we have a working relationship with? And I get, and we worked together on it, because I knew, because my work can be very political, and I didn't want to insult the Mexican consulate, especially because I wanted to do something that had to do with immigration.
Yeah.
And that's a hot topic. It's always been a hot topic. But you always say, oh, this is what's going on right now in the U.S. and the immigrants from Mexico and Central America. It's always, since I was a kid, this has been a hot topic.
Yeah.
And I got to experience a lot of that thing, and people asking me for papers.
Yes.
That's, and I was born in the U.S. I wasn't an immigrant in that kind of respect.
So you're like, papers up. I've got my driver's license and ID and voter's registration.
And, this happened even as, a few years ago in Oklahoma. Like when I don't want to get down that path, but my point being is that people can approach programming or cultural events or art making like a checking a box, or you can say, okay, who is truly in this culture? Who's putting in the time? Who do we know? This is, I think, where Jeremiah was coming from. And I proposed this project, and the consulate said, yes, we totally get it. So this is the relationship, though, because I didn't want to embarrass my friend or embarrass the Mexican government. I wanted to make sure everything was
the best representation could come up.
And we were all happy with it.
Yeah.
And we had the opening. It was in the lobby of Oklahoma Contemporary. It was, again, this kind of moving experience. They asked me to speak, and I was able to explain, because, you see an altar, you say, okay, you've probably seen 100 of them, this Day of Dead altars, and, this is to Frida Kahlo. Yeah, I get it. It's Mexican celebrities. Vicente Fernandez is on there. I get it. Or
they usually have the usual faces associated with.
Or it could be something very personal, like, oh, here's my grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to make an offering, or maybe a sacrifice or remembrance of people that have lost their lives crossing this border for a better life. that was what they were guilty of. Anybody, I don't know where they're from, they want the best for their family.
Yeah.
And would you go as far as giving your life, sacrificing something like this for your family? And these people are in that position. And I've never been in that position, but I like to think that I would do whatever it took to get my family out of a certain situation, or whether it's safety or economic freedom or education. The reason why I moved from Mexico to the U.S. was for education. That was the reason my father made it. The school system here, it can only give us so much, and so we see this opportunity. It was, things were cheaper in Mexico, and as a young boy, I didn't want to go. I had visited the U.S., but it kind of scared me. They asked me, do you want to go? And I said no. But the decision was, hey, for education, we have to make this change.
There was the bigger picture that you had to consider.
Yeah. And so
I'm glad you came.
Yeah.
I would have never have met you if you hadn't come.
Yeah.
So what's next on the horizon for you? From a creative standpoint, we didn't get a lot into what you were making, and I want to ask that you come back for another one.
Yeah.
So we can talk creative shop.
Yeah. I'm recently, there are some things I can't talk about because I haven't been given the green light to talk about, but there's some really interesting things coming up on the horizon for 2025. I can tell you some things in 2024 is my plan is to return to Istanbul for a few days to do a mural with my former students, and the school that I taught at is, now when I say this, I'm not being like hyperbolic.
Okay.
It's world famous Robert College. Now a lot of people like outside of private school, academia, high schools, they might not know this name, but the students from this high school go on to MIT, Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge. I have a former student at Oxford right now. I have a former student at Dartmouth. These are the next leaders in Europe or in the U.S. in areas like film, medicine, engineering. And I had the privilege of working there. And the next time we do this, I can talk about that journey, how I got there. Because imagine a kid from Tijuana, and not even downtown Tijuana, like rural, like farm country Tijuana, away from the border, how he was able to teach at this prestigious school years later, and how that fits in having a world impact.
Yeah.
We have this impact locally. Like, what am I doing here? Look, and then that's very important to me. And like building the next Chicano artist. As a high school teacher, I'm very aware of that. I'm not going to live forever. We need, as a society and my specific community, the next leaders. Who's going to go?
Somebody to pass that baton.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm very reminiscent. I'm very like aware of that. So next time I want to come back and talk about Robert College, but in 2024 I'm going back there and do a mural, and I might do some research for some future work there.
Okay.
But it's what we were talked about earlier, like how, as a Chicano artist, how do I make work? Like when I was in Istanbul, people thought I was Turkish, that they thought I was not.
Do you speak Turkish?
No.
Okay.
But people, they came up to me speaking Turkish, thinking I was Turkish. Maybe not. Turkey is divided in half. I don't know if people know this. And Istanbul specifically, there is a European side and an Asian side. We're literally,
So they assume that perhaps
I was on the Asian side.
Yeah.
That's what they thought. And so I would just say kindly, English. And then they would start laughing, and we would both start laughing. And there was a lot of that happened. Anyway, as an artist, Chicano artist, how do I make work? It took me a while, and I still haven't really, I'm still in that kind of research phase. It's part of the process. You make something, it might be a failed experiment. How do I access living in that city and being Chicano, where a lot of it had to do with identity, but thinking about it globally? And so I'm still trying to find that intersection of this kind of shared history and that culture. There, when I ask people, hey, who is the indigenous people of this land? And they start laughing at me because so many different cultures went through there.
Yeah.
Like, who knows?
It's a head scratcher.
Yeah, who the original people there were. But that's fascinating to me. Those kind of questions like, hey, this is an intersection, like not just of ideas, but of like physical people going through, and east and west. It's right here. And it's very intriguing. So I have that, and I've been working with Norman Firehouse Art Center. I did a small mural there about a month ago, 2 months ago. The director there, Andy Couch, he just happens to be a former student of mine, and he's now the director of this art center. And I couldn't be more proud of this guy. We've just been friends through the years, and he's come to my openings, and I've just happened to visit him when he was working at the Fred Jones, and it was just this, again, it's this kind of spiritual thing. When he knew I returned. He reached out to me last year, I think, or the beginning of this school year, and he goes, "Hey, you're back in town." He sought me out, and it's those kind of like, the real ones.
Oh yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? And this term ally, Andy Couch is one of those people. And just people that they kind of get it, and we can joke about stuff, and they're not offended. They understand where it's coming from, because if you're part of a culture that has been, maybe a secondhand citizen, or you experience racism, a lot of times, and this, the way we deal with it is through humor.
Oh yeah.
And
when we can laugh about something,
Yeah.
and it can be something of just an imminently overwhelming situation. You have to somehow find a way to laugh at it.
Yeah. And I've had discussions with people like who we've mentioned, Jeremiah and Andy, about how, as a person who's programming something, an event, how you navigate. And you were talking about like white people and how they exist in this kind of current state of not trying to offend somebody, but also trying to be inclusive
And not trying to like themselves too much.
Sorry, yeah. But these guys ask those questions, and I've never. I mean, you can. I assume, unless I'm, completely blind, you can kind of figure out those people. Like, hey, this guy, just wants something from me, and you've probably been in meetings where they start talking and they start mining your ideas. And,
Oh yeah, I sit there with that look on my face, like let's get on with it. I know what you're doing. I know what's going on.
And it's too bad, but these guys are like asking those kind of hard questions, and I'm sure they've had those moments where people have accused them or whatever. I remember years ago having a meeting at OVAC, and just casually talking to people. This is like maybe 3 directors ago. and they're talking about, oh yeah, we get these phone calls and say, hey, why are these same 5 guys getting such and such? And, how do you handle that? And you don't want to be accused of And they were doing, outside curators, right? And they got into like, okay, maybe we can develop, and there's always answers, right? Develop, which they do. It's the writing curatorial fellowship that they do, which I was a part of. They're trying to find people to fill those gaps.
Yeah.
So as an organization, I've always said that they've always been above board, but even them, they get accused of whatever it is. And
I've heard rumblings.
Yeah. And
but it's kind of odd because throughout Oklahoma, it's like the same group of people end up being considered for the same thing. So it's kind of like, okay. And you can almost predict, this person's going to, I'm pretty sure exhibit A, B, C, or D is going to be the next person for that opportunity.
Yeah. And I don't know how, because I was making art in San Diego and Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Those were huge cities. So you didn't, sometimes people, got on a streak there where they were getting some stuff and you just happened to know them. But there were so many people, so many artists, the wealth, applicants or whatever, the pool was a lot larger. And then here, it's so small.
It is.
And there have been times where I've said, you know what, I'm going to back off of this because I don't want to feel like, I don't want people to perceive that it's just me
that you've been picked. It's like,
like I've been anointed or whatever. And I'm aware of that stuff. And I'm also aware that the group now that I've noticed are, a lot of them I've known because they went through my class. I'm not saying that I had anything to do with their success, but I just have.
You more than likely did.
Yeah.
Which is funny because my next podcast, you talk about student and teacher and you're proud of what your student has done. Well, the catalyst for me being a creative was my 5th grade teacher, Frank Coble. And I didn't know if Mr. Coble was still around. And somehow I listed a book that had inspired me. This book was responsible for everything creative that I've done.
Interesting.
My first novel, I didn't know how to read a novel because I'm still doing comic books, so I didn't understand certain... I didn't understand how a book could be so engrossing once you learn how to comprehend that it could be better than a movie.
Yeah.
And he gave me my first book. It was a collection of them. It was Susan B. Cooper's The Gray King and The Dark is Rising. And after that, I started mimicking writing. I started doing creative things, art, just all this stuff. It was this big explosion. And then my dad helped me because he never got in the way of it. He was like, okay, something's going on with this kid. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it can make money, but it's honest and he's not killing anybody.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. And I got in contact with him. Another person that was a Facebook friend said, yeah, that was my teacher too. I have his contact. And we had a great conversation. It was kind of tearful because he didn't know that he had that effect.
Right.
So those connections, man, you have no idea of what you're perpetuating through those connections. So take credit. You were there.
Yeah. Maybe maybe one sentence. Fitly spoken. One of them
takes one.
Yeah. One of them is Carlos Barbosa, who's doing murals all over town.
That guy is amazing.
Yeah.
Paul introduced me to his work. Paul Medina introduced me. He said, man, there's kind of was it Paul or was it Skip? One of them. It's either Paul or Skip on that, we talk a lot about like new works and stuff like that and people that we're kind of excited about. But yeah, Carlos is absolutely phenomenal as a muralist and an artist.
If you remember, he was a graphic designer. I
didn't know him. I didn't know anything about him. He kind of exploded up on the scene for me. I didn't know Carlos.
Well, I curated an exhibit with inclusion in art at the UCO Boathouse.
I remember that.
And he was one of the artists I put in there. And he goes, I'm not really an artist. And I said, well, let me see some of your work. And he had like several paintings. And one of them was a painting of Charles Bukowski, which is, one of my favorite beat poets. And I said, dude, I got to put you in this exhibit. I wish I could remember more about the exhibit. I think I put him in it was his first art exhibit ever.
And now look at it.
And like a few months later, he quit like his day job, and I'm going to be this full-time artist. And I don't know, like I said, I don't take any credit. But thank God I kept up with him and encouraged him. And I curated him in a second exhibit, his second ever exhibit. I said, oh, dude, I know these murals are great, but the goal is to work this size, a small size, and get those prices up.
Yeah.
$3,000, $10,000. And soon, because you can finish this a lot quicker than a mural, even though he works incredibly fast.
Yeah. His work is phenomenal. I look forward to following him and seeing what he does. As far as young artists, I get excited when a young artist shows a certain degree of maturity that you're not expecting, and it makes you go, well, shit. He's kind of, I've got to, make sure that my chops are up. And
yeah. No, absolutely. And he's the nicest guy as well.
Yeah.
He's I just happened to keep up with him like through the years after he graduated. And after I stopped teaching, I think I met him at either UCO or it was probably UCO.
Yeah.
Teaching there, but I also taught at Oklahoma Christian University, and so that's where I met Andy, the director, and Norbert Firehouse. And I'll tell you a funny story. I'm also friends with this local chef, and I met him. I don't know if you remember this Platt College.
I remember Platt College way back in the days.
Yeah. So this was...
Is Platt even still around?
No.
Okay.
They were bought out, and during the pandemic, I think he just shuttered there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know about the parent company, but eventually, I think they had like 2 campuses, but they taught culinary arts.
Yeah.
And, they couldn't probably keep up with the tech, the Vo-Techs and their culinary arts. Anyway, but I taught there like doing the adjunct thing. One of the things I always tell my students, hey, you have to create your own opportunities.
Yeah.
So I cold called them and I said, hey, do you guys ever teach art history? And he goes, yeah, we do. We're actually looking for a guy. So I just cold called them. And I said, okay, here's a college. I can teach this class anyway. But one of those chefs, we went on a field trip to Oklahoma City Museum of Art back when they had that museum cafe. And I said, hey, here's a cafe, guys. Why don't you guys apply here? And one of them did.
Yeah.
Became the head chef there.
Wow.
So and for a while there, I would run into people like at places like Cheesecake Factory. They would like, hey, I make the cheesecakes here. They would come out of the, you're my art teacher. Or at butcher shop. Hey, I'm the guy who does the meat here, right? And it was, that's one of the things I love about being a teacher, and Oklahoma being so small that I would run into people like that. And
you still have an enthusiasm for it. A lot of people, most teacher stories I hear are, oh, I'm so burnt out. Why did I? But you still have the enthusiasm for it. And there's probably a million things. And with your permission, I'd love to invite you back.
Absolutely.
I could shoot the breeze with you all day.
Yeah.
Well, Narciso, let's agree to pick up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where we're leaving off, and let's kind of do a series of conversations, and see what those conversations yield. I don't set up a particular format. I never have. I don't think you get the best conversations.
Yeah.
Because when it's lights, camera, action, you're on, we freeze.
Yeah.
I'd rather talk.
Yeah.
So we're agreeing here to do that.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Sounds good. Well, this is Nathan Lee with Narciso Arguelles. I never could pronounce. I have such a hard time.
My students call me Mr. A.
Mr. A.
Yeah.
Well, my longtime friend, Mr. A. And hopefully we can do another podcast and see what else he's getting into. Probably one of the most interesting people that I know. Share, like, and subscribe, and let people know about this little channel that we're trying to grow. And until the next time, from Life is Art, take care.